Thank you, and good to see you all. Thank you for joining this late this afternoon, probably at the end of your day. I'm Renee Kubiatis. I am the Anti-Poverty Program Director for New Jersey Citizen Action. I also oversee the Anti-Poverty Network statewide, which is a coalition of the New Jersey Citizen Action. And prior to April or May of last year, I also was Executive Director of the Anti-Poverty Network before it joined forces with Citizen Action for 5 years. And thank you again to Eric and all of the folks at NJ All for inviting me back again this year to talk about these critical issues that really impact students, people who are lifelong learners participating in all kinds of educational activities and prevent them from really reaching their end goals a lot of times, right? These issues of income inequity and racial and social inequity and the like. And I know Eric said that a lot of the programming during conference today has talked about inequality. So I'm not actually going to cover a whole lot of that, but certainly if you have questions or thoughts, you can throw them in the chat. And if folks also want to take a moment before we jump in and just kind of introduce yourselves in the chat, since there are a number of us, and just say your name, kind of any organizational affiliation you have, or what part of the state you're in, if you want to say that. So we get a sense of who's here and what kinds of work you're doing with this population. That would be great. So New Jersey Citizen Action is a statewide coalition and grassroots organization that fights for social, racial, and economic justice for all in our state. They were founded in 1982, so we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. And we combine political advocacy, electoral campaigns, public outreach, community empowerment programs, or direct service kinds of work to make a real difference in the lives of everyday residents in our state. And with this comprehensive approach, the organization addresses systemic and institutional issues, as well as the pressing needs and interests of low and moderate income individuals in New Jersey. So great. Oh, I touch my mouse and all of a sudden things start jumping around. It's very sensitive on this platform. So I just wanted to show this. I came across this recently, and it really, we see a lot about, the kids looking over the fence with equality and equity, right? That meme on social media from time to time. But this is a really great overview of what we're talking about with different terms, right? So inequality is that the tree is leaning one way and the apples are falling towards one child versus another, right? Equality is giving them the same size ladder, but as you can see, the person on the right doesn't quite reach the apples still, even with equality. Equity is giving the person with the height disadvantage on the right, a taller ladder so they can actually reach, which is great. But then when we talk about justice, justice is correcting the tree, right? A lot of times when we talk about issues and we talk about solutions and the programs that are implemented to help address disadvantaged populations in our state or in our nation, there are things that really kind of address the effects, that address the leaves, the branches of the tree, but don't necessarily address the roots, right? And so I wanted to talk about some of the things that can really address the roots of these injustices in our state and some of the programs that you may not be aware of for the folks that you work with today. So again, programs helping bridge the income equity gaps. Who has come across issues with folks who don't have reliable internet connections, are using phones a lot of the time, and can't really access the things they need all the time? I see a hand. I know not everybody is on camera right now, but if you want to kind of raise your icon hand there, or put something in the chat even. Yeah. So this is the digital divide, if you will, is a huge issue. We know that there are significant numbers of folks, and especially in certain areas of our state, and probably in all 21 counties, who don't have access to adequate internet, to adequate, devices, to like a laptop versus trying to do things from a smartphone, that kind of thing. right towards the beginning of the pandemic, actually in 2020, the federal government launched the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, which was a really great program. And then that was a 6-month pilot, and it became, in January of this year, the Affordable Connectivity Program as a permanent program to provide access to, subsidies, assistance for folks for their internet service, as well as up to $150 towards a laptop if they don't have that kind of a device to do the work that they need to do for school, for work, for other things, right? And so it provides subsidies, like I said, to low-income households up to 200% of the federal poverty level. So for a family of 4, that would mean an income of $55,500, sorry. And like I said, it provides up to a $30 per month subsidy towards their internet service. And you can go to ARP at the bottom here to find out more. And then there's also a website nationally where you can look up providers as well. It can be a little tricky if you're trying to help people access this and get assistance through the program, because they may have only a smartphone, and so their provider is T-Mobile or whoever it is, right? Sprint. And they can get $30 for that too. But if they're really looking for, to actually have a laptop and have another device that they can use more easily for the kinds of things they need to do, then they can get that $150 subsidy towards a laptop and get the laptop provided through an internet provider like Comcast, Optimity, all those different companies across the state who provide internet. And so you can go to this website, you can find the list of all the different providers in New Jersey, and see, who you can apply through. So you go directly through the internet provider or, Wi-Fi provider.
Renee, there's a question in the chat about whether the ACP is available for recent refugees.
Yeah, I don't believe there's any stipulation, in terms of being an immigrant or being a US citizen, that kind of thing for this program.
Okay.
But you can find a lot more details at the website. Thanks for that question. Sorry, I touch my mouse and it moves on its own to other slides. Other program that we've been working on for a while, for a few years actually, is the Workforce New Jersey TANF program, or Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. Are folks familiar with this program? It's the only cash assistance program for very low income families, for those families generally in deep poverty. I don't know if there's anything in the chat or anybody wanted to say anything about this program. Or
a couple people are saying yes. Okay. I think the same thing. If you've heard of it, you can raise your digital hand or put something in the chat.
Yeah, great. So do you all work with folks who are receiving this kind of assistance? Yeah, I see a nod. Okay. Yeah, and then the other program for individuals, not for families, under Workforce New Jersey is General Assistance, or GA, it's referred to. But we've been focusing a lot on TANF and really getting the right supports in this program in New Jersey for families and for children in deep poverty. So we created our program, our state program, in '97 after welfare reform passed in 1996 at the federal level. It replaced AFDC, which was aid to families with dependent children, sorry. And again, like I said, it's meant to reach those families in deep poverty, and that's considered 50% of the federal poverty level or below. So any idea of what kind of income that is for folks?
You can put your guesses in the chat.
Okay. I don't see any guesses. Okay. Okay, have no idea.
My guess is that it's around $14,000–15,000.
Pretty close, actually. So it depends on your family size, right? So the federal poverty level is set for each different family size each year. But for a family of 3, 50% of the federal poverty level right now would be $11,500 $515 a year. However, as you can see from the chart on the right, many families are no longer receiving this program and this assistance, right? Because we've had a 91% decline between 1996 when this program was created and 2018 or even 2020 now in enrollment in this program because of the sanctions and punitive nature of the program, and it especially harms families of colors and pushes them off the program before they're ready and before they have an opportunity to connect to a decent paying job, right? And so we're only reaching folks at around 30% of the federal poverty level. So for a family of three, that's $9,609 in income a year. I mean, that's pretty crazy to think about, right? That there are families out there at that income level, and they're not necessarily, if they're slightly above that, if they're at $10,000, they're not getting this program because our program has not, met the need. And it's not New Jersey's fault necessarily. We were charged with implementing a federal program back in the 90s, right? And we did it. But we really needed to take another look at this program and like I said, create the kinds of supports that are really needed to help lift families out of poverty, to help connect them to decent paying jobs that are sustainable. That, right now, a lot of times families are pushed off the program to the first available job, whether it's part-time, whether it only pays a minimum wage, which isn't enough to survive on for a family right now in our state, because we're a very high cost state, or that it's not sustainable because of, not reliable transportation or other reasons, right? And so families are just cycling in and out of the same very low paying jobs that brought them to this program to begin with. So we're not really giving them any added benefit when they leave the program to really be sustainable. And we know that 8 out of 10 kids in this program are Black or Latino right now. And we know that families of color are disproportionately in this lower income category in deep poverty, right? So we need to make sure it's meeting the needs of all those families, and we're looking at the racial equity component as well. So again, this is the number of cases, the number of families on TANF, and families with kids in poverty. And as you can see, we're definitely not reaching the number of families with kids in poverty in 2020. And again, 68% of children in poverty are Black and Hispanic, and we need to make sure that this program is available and supporting those families. So many families in this program are not receiving the kind of education and training they need to really get into those decent paying jobs. And many aspects of legislation I'm going to talk about in a moment would do just that and change different elements and provisions in the program to make sure they're getting access to the education and training they need to get into those decent paying jobs, whether it's apprenticeship programs at county colleges or 2 or 4 year college degrees. And those experiences can count as work requirements, right? Right now, folks aren't even allowed in the program to go do work experience hours in a for-profit industry. Because when we set up our program in 1997, New Jersey, and I don't know how many states did this, but not many, defined work experience as only being in a nonprofit organization. So recipients on this program for all these years, for almost 26 years, can only get work experience in nonprofit organizations. I'm a social worker. I speak to Masters of Social Work students at Rutgers every year in classes. And I tell them all the time, we don't make that much more than our clients many times, right? In our profession. We're not that far away from our clients' experience. And so we're forcing TANF recipients to go into those same kinds of occupations and not really get the kind of economic mobility that they deserve, right? So now in this legislation, we would also expand work experiences to for-profit industries and public entities as well. And we know that the state has been hearing from industries for years now, almost screaming at the state to say, we have all these jobs we can't fill. There aren't enough skilled workers for these jobs, right? Yet we've been denying this whole population in this program from accessing the skills to get into those jobs. And so this legislation would do that and help give them all of the different resources they need to get the appropriate education or training to be more sustainable, self-sufficient, all of those things. So there is legislation right now that we expect will be moving and hopefully passed by the end of June, fingers crossed. So it would create a goal for our state program for the very first time to actually lift people out of poverty. That's never been a goal of this program, federally or statewide. It would increase the monthly benefits so that we actually are reaching those families at 50% of the federal poverty level at that $11,515 a year or less. Reduce the work hour requirements. We actually put in place in our state more stringent weekly work hours than the federal government required in the 1996 legislation. So we'd like to reduce ours down to 30. And then for families with very young children, 6 and under, they would only be required to do 20 hours a week so that they can go to school still or get access to the other things and not be traveling around juggling transportation to get the children to childcare, to get to their work experience job, right? To get back, to get the kids, to get food on the table, to get medications they need, right? Like all these the basic things that we all do every day that we don't think about, and give them the time to really build and focus on the things that will help get them where they need to be long term. And then for children or infants, I should say, the program currently allows parents not to work for first 3 months of the infant's life. In this law, it would exempt them for up to a year of that infant's life, that first year. Expand access to quality childcare, which is a critical element for everybody in our state right now, not just very low income parents, but certainly has become a key issue throughout the pandemic the last 2 years. Again, improve that education and training, remove the 5-year ban for lawfully present immigrants. These are not undocumented immigrants we're talking about, not that they don't deserve help too, but we're just saying don't require them to be here for 5 years if they're lawfully present to gain access to the assistance if they've fallen on hard times. Reduce that benefits cliff so they're not being pushed out into jobs before they're ready, and then lose different kinds of benefits and can't really survive. But really, and improve the off-ramp of the program when they do get into work. And then critically important is data collection by the Department of Human Services and Department of Labor at the state level, so that we're measuring what kinds of jobs are parents getting into, what kind of income are they getting when they get into a job, how long are they maintaining that job, all those important things. So we know that the program's working and it's doing what it's supposed to, which we don't collect right now.
Renee, before you move on to the next slide, I just wanted to say one quick thing about the benefits cliff. In the last session that we just had about the use of data, one of the key points was that adult learners, should be given opportunities to use data, right, and not just be the subject of data collection, right? And so I think certainly reducing the benefits cliff, like that's a section where our adult learners are data analysts, right? They are looking at how much money they would make, how much money they would lose, right? Sure. They have to do some fairly complex, budgetary mathematics to be able to make sure that they're not putting their families at risk.
Yeah. And I've said that, about for almost 2 decades now, about a lot of low income people who are trying to figure out how to manage on income that's too low, right? We don't give people the credit for all of the skills and talents they have to be able to juggle and put money here, or, I don't need to pay that yet, but let me put the money here for now. And then when I get more money, I pay this, right? Like, and juggle all of the responsibilities within their family. And it really takes a lot to juggle and survive every day, in those experiences. And we know that a significant portion of residents in our state are struggling economically, right? And having to make those difficult choices sometimes, or even going to the grocery store. Do I buy, toothpaste so that I have nice, fresh smelling breath when I go into work or to school? Or do I buy a couple more yogurts so I can have a little bit more, to live on, physically for the week, right?
Yeah.
And folks are making those difficult decisions, but you're absolutely right. They have a lot of skills. And I've actually talked with the Council of County Colleges at a couple of times and said, you know, is there any way of giving folks credit for those life skills, right? Can we think about that, you know? So excellent point. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom knew that the rent could be late, but the car payment could not.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. I think Matthew Desmond, who wrote the book Evicted, said the rent always eats first. Yeah. So another couple of programs that have long been shown to be real strong anti-poverty programs in our nation and in our state. The Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a tax credit that is given to low-income workers' families when they file their annual tax returns. And then the Child Tax Credit, which you may know about from the pandemic as part of the stimulus package and what was expanded in the Child Tax Credit to really give more benefits to families who were struggling these last couple of years, especially last year was expanded greatly. But I'm going to talk about like the state level with this legislation that hopefully will be moving through the legislature again by the end of June, along with our state budget, which has to be signed into law by July 1st. So there are bills, as you can see in the blue here, S2523 and A3857. There were 3 separate bills to expand the Earned Income Tax Credit for the state in a few different ways in the last legislative session and then this new legislative session that just started in January. And those were recently combined into this legislation that was just introduced, I think, on the 9th of May. But hopefully, again, we'll be moving quickly through the legislature. And it does 3 things, this legislation. It would expand the Earned Income Tax Credit for New Jersey residents from 40% to 45%. What that means is our state tax credit, when people file their state tax returns, the Earned Income Tax Credit is a percentage of the federal tax credit, right? Under Governor Christie a few years ago, ours was at 25% of the federal credit. And starting under Governor Christie and then continuing under Governor Murphy, we've increased it from 25% to 40% as of last year. So now residents in the state, when they file their state tax return, get 40%. And so we'd like to expand it a little bit more up to 45% over the next 5 years, so like 1% a year. Another big thing that would expand the tax credit is making it available to ITIN holders, right? So many immigrants, most immigrants, I would say 80–85% of immigrant families in our state are of mixed immigration status. So you have some members who are documented, some who are not, right? And so some family members may have a social security number, maybe the children, and then some may have what's called an ITIN or another, a different kind of tax number. And so this would expand our state EITC to all of those ITIN holders who will now be able to file for this tax credit each year. And this could be thousands of dollars sometimes, right? The tax credit, we've heard from folks who say, I needed new tires on my car that I couldn't afford. So I waited till I filed my tax return and could get that tax credit to pay for the new tires. Or I had a major repair that I needed on the car and was just praying and hoping that the car wouldn't die before I got the tax credit. And then I was able to afford it and get that car repaired. Or my child needed glasses last year and I wasn't able to get them, but now I have a little bit of money with this. So I could finally get my child glasses for, reading and doing well at school. Or my child needed clothes, my child needed shoes, all those things that you go without until you get a little bit more money, right? So the tax credit really does lift families out of poverty every single year and provides those things that they've gone without. And then the third thing this legislation would do, and this is a smaller category of people, but certainly very critical, is currently domestic violence survivors cannot claim the Earned Income Tax Credit because there are only 2 filing statuses they can use. One is head of household, which is usually the abuser would file that, right, under that, or married filing jointly, which they can't do because they're not with the abuser, and they may not be divorced quite yet. So this creates a new category of married filing separately, and they can finally claim that Earned Income Tax Credit. to give them that boost, especially when we know domestic violence survivors are typically a lot worse off financially because of that abusive situation. And so they're starting from farther behind to try and build their life with their children. And so this can be a big boost to help them in that beginning. So that we're hoping will get passed, and it's a fairly big cost, 130 million in our state budget. But I don't know if folks heard, we have like a huge surplus already. And then on Monday, our state treasury in the budget hearings at the State House announced that we have an additional $4-point-something billion in surplus in our state budget that we didn't even know about a couple months ago. So there's a lot of money around this year. And these are the kinds of things that we should be making sure we do so that we're reaching those lowest income residents in our state. And, you know, we talked a lot about building back better during the pandemic, right? And we need to make sure that we are really doing better. We're not just getting back to where we were before with all the inequities for different people, but we need to make sure that we're erasing and eliminating those inequities. And then the second program, folks, I said, you know, we have that great successful child tax credit program at the federal level that folks were able to benefit from. Really, again, helped lift 37 million children out of poverty last year at the federal level. We'd like the state to create a child tax credit program as well. And this would create a tax credit of $500 a year for each child under the age of 6. And we focused on young children because we know that's when there are very much higher costs. You know, whether it's childcare, diapers, formula, which is a huge issue right now. Folks can't even find that, of course. But all of these different things cost so much for the younger child, right? And so if we had extended it to like children under 18, families would have received a much lower amount of like maybe $125, $150 a year, which isn't enough to really make an impact. But by limiting it to these young children, we can get families at least $500 a year, which tacks on to the earned income tax credit they're getting at the state level, as well as anything like that at the federal level they can get, right? So it's, again, potentially thousands of dollars that we can help boost them. Any thoughts or questions, or have you seen how this program works now, or?
I think, Renee, this is one of these things where it's really important that your organization is on top of this, because I think people start to get lost in a sea of acronyms between CTC.
Sure. Are folks familiar with EITC and CTC?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like, it's, you know, the ball keeps moving. So that's why we need people whose job it is to keep their eye on the ball.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to touch on before I talk about utilities, because folks got really far behind on rent and mortgage and utilities as well during the pandemic, is the child tax credit and EITC monies that are still out there. So what most people don't know, and I didn't know until this year, is that there really is no tax filing deadline for folks who are owed money from the government. The April 18th tax filing deadline last month is for people who owed the government money. There aren't really penalties for filing a tax return at another time after the 18th of April, right? And so we had a report back in the end of February from United Way of Northern New Jersey that showed about 50% of all families who could have claimed that big federal child tax credit that I talked about did not claim it. Half of all families in our state who could have gotten that economic boost didn't get it, right? I mean, we were talking to the New Jersey Treasury Department, and they were telling us after February that more families were, you know, they were seeing more tax returns come in to claim those kinds of credits, as they typically would as it got closer to that April 18th deadline, because again, most people think that's a deadline for everybody. But I still feel like there's still an awful lot of families out there who haven't gotten access to the credit from last year that still could get it. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody knows that if there's anybody you're working with who could be eligible for this, that they find out and get a free tax preparation service, get connected to a free tax preparation service to get this credit, right? So you can claim the child tax credit or the EITC for up to 3 years after you're eligible for it. So you could still, even like if you file a tax return right now, you could also have them file a tax return for last year and the year before if you didn't file tax returns. And we think many of the families, not most, but many of the families who didn't get access to these tax credits are those families who are on TANF, who are on SSI, who normally wouldn't file a tax return. It's a foreign thing to them. It's not something they do, right? And so by connecting them to these free tax preparation services or VITA centers, it's, we have one, it's New Jersey Citizen Action. They can get this free assistance, and they're really great folks who know the tax law and can really help identify all the monies that they're eligible for. And then you can also amend your tax return if you've made a mistake. Again, there's no penalty as long as you don't owe money. So you can see at the bottom here, you can go to New Jersey 211, the information line, and find out all the free tax preparation locations around the state for anybody that might be eligible for this. And certainly go to our website at newjerseycitizenaction.org, where you can get connected to our free VITA center as well. Was somebody saying something? Or asking
No,
a
I think
question?
it was just the inadvertent audio.
Okay. Okay. Was there anything in the chat before I go on? Okay. Any questions on that? Is there anybody here eligible that didn't know that they might be eligible?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really crucial thing, right? So that when a policy or when a program is made available, if the people aren't used to that, if it's not part of their routine,
Right.
then they're going to be less likely to access it, right? And so,
right, and especially if they think it's like a complicated process, they're not used to filing something like a tax return. And actually, just recently, the federal government, along with Code for America, relaunched in May their free, I think it's getctc.org. So get child tax credit, get CTC. And if you go there, it's a simplified filing tool where it's not a full tax return. You don't have to provide the documents that you would with a tax return, but it's still a tax return filing, right? And something that the government wanted to make sure was made available to these very low income families so that they can have some way of filing and getting these credits, even if it is a foreign kind of, process to them, and maybe feels more complicated and intimidating even. Yeah, so any questions before we go on?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talked just now about the CTC and the EITC and about this sort of filing.
Right.
I am wondering who really knows about them.
Right.
Now, I think that the people who need to know don't know. So how can we really get that information out to the folks who need it?
Yeah, I think if you're somewhere where you're working with families who are very low income, certainly nonprofits who are working with folks around other services, whether it's housing assistance or food assistance or other things, they should be providing this information too. I tried to get the state to do this last year with the very low income populations and send out letters to people who normally wouldn't file a tax return, but I didn't, unfortunately, I wasn't successful in getting the state to do that. But yeah, those are the ways, is really through the avenues where we're already engaging with people who are eligible, right? Yeah.
Agree, but there's no real effort or drive on the part of the state to make sure that that's done. Am I wrong or right?
Yeah, not currently. I think the state could have sent a letter to every single TANF recipient, for example. Just a simple letter with, here are the details. You could be eligible for money. Here's the website. Very direct messaging. But unfortunately, we didn't see that happen. But I think, we still have a lot of opportunity to get that information out to folks, because again, there is no deadline for them to claim this money. They can still claim it at any time and it still be helpful to them.
I think this is one of the areas where, we as educators, program directors, tutors, teachers, right? That who do we follow, right? Do we follow NJ Citizen Action on Twitter and social media?
Sure.
So that we
point.
see this information when it comes out, and so that we can further amplify it, and put it into our programs.
Yeah. And not because I work for them. I actually, I've only been with them for a little over a year, or about a year, but admired Citizen Action for a long time before that. I do think the New Jersey Citizen Action is one of those organizations to follow, because again, we not only have the policy and advocacy folks like myself who are working on all kinds of the major issues facing folks across our state to change those policies, but we also have that direct empowerment side, which is where we have our Affordable Care Act and open enrollment every year that we're helping connect people to ensure health insurance coverage, right? Where we have financial coaching for folks who have gotten into student debt or other kinds of debt and need free help, not $1,200 they're paying to get out, to get help to figure out their debt, which unfortunately happens still all the time too. Or this Vitus Center, this free tax preparation center, and other things that we do. We also have the eviction prevention program right now under all the emergency rental assistance programs that have been happening with the state throughout the pandemic. So we have lots of different services. So you can find out all kinds of information if you just follow us on Twitter or Facebook, or you can certainly sign up for our new email. And we just started this month a new monthly email newsletter. So you can get information about these kinds of things that way as well. Yeah, to be able to pass the information on. Was there somebody else who was going to speak up? I saw somebody come on camera before. Any other thoughts or questions?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Move on.
Okay. I also wanted to talk about utility assistance, because I think this is another area where not everybody is aware of the assistance available. So last October, we have like $173 million, which is historic, in our LIHEAP program, which stands for Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, right? We have $262 million that was allocated last year for our Universal Service Fund, which is for folks at slightly higher income levels for utility assistance. And we had a $24 million federal allocation for the brand new pandemic low income home water assistance program. We've never had a water and sewer assistance program before. And this was just created during the pandemic at the federal level, right? So there's all this funding out there. And what we keep hearing from the Department of Community Affairs in the state is we don't have enough applications. People aren't applying, right? People don't know about it. And one of the best things is the Universal Service Fund, that middle program I talked about. We expanded the eligibility last October. It used to be 185% of the federal poverty level to qualify. It's now 400%, more than doubled. That's a huge increase, right? So many people are eligible to get assistance on their water or gas and electric bills right now. And so the Universal Service Fund, for example, a family of 4 could be making $106,000 a year and get help on their past utility bills that they weren't able to pay during the pandemic, right? And what's great about the Universal Service Fund also is that they have a program within that program called Fresh Start. And so that program can wipe out your entire past due utility bill each year, right? So it's not just getting a little bit of help towards your utility bill. You could get your entire arrears wiped out for this year or for last year, if that's when you owed the money for, right? But you're only eligible to get that, that Fresh Start program once a year is what I'm saying, right? So you can find out more. You can connect to different utility assistance agencies around the state. I have the website up there. You can also call 211 and get that access to the different nonprofits who are doing utility assistance and can sign you up. There's a hotline with DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, that I've listed there. And then if you're disabled, homebound, you need additional assistance completing an application, you can also email the Department of Community Affairs at dca.nj.gov there in that email address. But there's so much help out there right now that many people don't even know about, right?
Renee, I'm wondering, one of the things that we've talked about earlier today, or over the course of the day, is people called digital navigators or tech navigators, right? Whose job is to, work with folks to get them to be able to use digital resources in the ways that they need to, right? Or, health navigators who help people connect to the healthcare system. And in both cases, they may be bilingual, bicultural, right? They're going to go into the community and know where the people are that need to hear this. Are there utility ambassadors to do the same thing along these lines?
Yeah. So like I said, this middle link here on the screen is to find the different offices. They can tell you what you're eligible for, right? And help you walk through the process. Again, I think utility ambassadors is a great thing. I don't know that they're everywhere, right? But I've also been talking with like the county colleges and others and saying, make sure that folks know this information if you're not already doing it. I know there is at least one community college who's been employing folks like this to be some kind of an ambassador for the utility assistance, rental assistance, and other programs. As you probably know, over the last several years to 10 years now, colleges and county colleges have become more cognizant, aware of the huge income and economic struggles that students have these days. And so they have been, providing these food pantries, providing like a homeless ambassador or assist navigator kind of thing, right? And on all of these different things on campuses because they recognize the economic needs of students, right? So there's a lot more of this going on, especially in the education field across our state. Yeah, but that's a great idea. We do have, in terms of the emergency rental assistance programs that have been helping people out through the pandemic, there are these housing navigators that just getting started through a grant with the Department of Community Affairs of New Jersey. And then there are also, in the last month or so, they're just still getting started and getting, kind of going, but there are these navigators in the court systems for renters who already have an eviction case filed against them for rent that they owed during the pandemic, right? And so there are these navigators who are supposed to be kind of the liaison between the courts and the renter and DCA if they've applied for rental assistance but haven't gotten it yet, to really kind of help negotiate all of that and help mediate. Yeah, so there's a lot of that going on, but more of it is always needed, Eric. Yeah. Was somebody else going to say something? I see that Maricel liked your idea. Said she just thought of the utility ambassador and kind of like a central link as well. And then I was also going to put in the chat the name of the website for the simplified filing for taxes that the government launched with Code for America. I saw that was a question as well. And Suzanne's saying that many seniors are in that same boat where they don't realize they should file a tax return or that they're eligible for some credits. I don't know if you wanted to say more about that or things that might be helpful, Suzanne, while I'm looking up this, make sure I have the website correct for the child tax. Oh, no more microphone, okay. Yeah, it is getctc.org. Oh, I'll put that in. Okay. So there's the
Eric,
website. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Eric, can I ask? Sorry, this is Maris. I was going to ask a question, just following up on Priyanka's talk early this morning about the Digital Equity Act. Do you know in the Digital Equity Act funding whether there's actually a priority placed on digital connectivity, access, navigation in the context of these programs, versus it's up to states to figure it out? Or is there a priority at the act level on improving, thinking that non-participation may actually reflect some digital inequities?
Are you asking Eric?
No, I was asking you
You.
actually, but
Okay, I wasn't in that talk, so I'm not familiar with that legislation. I know others who are working around that area, but I'm not personally.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So
So
certainly
sorry.
that's something we can follow up on, Maricel.
yeah,
yeah,
that's a
I'll
great
follow
idea.
up with Priyanka about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great thought. So if folks aren't getting all of their utility arrears paid, there are access to deferred payment agreements with each of your utilities. No matter who your utility is, you have a right to this under state law. So if you're not able to get all of your arrears paid off, you can still have an agreement where you can pay over a certain amount over 12 months or so, or even sometimes up to 2 years right now with the historic arrears that we've had during the pandemic. Utility companies are doing that sometimes. So you can have one deferred payment agreement within a 12-month period to be able to pay down whatever balance you have. But don't let folks think that they have to go into a deferred payment agreement, because we've also seen messaging from some of the biggest utilities in the state, including as recently as March, before the moratorium on utility shutoffs was expiring, March 15th, that said, like, you must enter into a deferred payment agreement to avoid having your utility shut off on March 16th, like when the moratorium was ending. And then a much longer text where, like, several paragraphs down, it said, oh, and there's also assistance available if you qualify, right? Not, leading with, there's so much assistance out there that you can get your utility arrears paid off. And if you need, we have deferred payment agreements. That really should have been the message. But sometimes these utilities are being threatening and leading with, you must enter into a deferred payment agreement, but that's not the case. That is absolutely not the case. And so folks should know that too. So we're getting short on time here, and I just wanted to talk about some of our other services. I mentioned that we're, we have a lot of different things going on at Citizen Action, and certainly open it for any other questions or conversation. But again, we have housing, rental, and foreclosure counseling. We are a national HUD certified housing counselor. And so we help people to kind of help prepare to buy a first home, to kind of find rental housing. Sometimes, many times with, if you do get access to a housing voucher for assistance, that's only half the battle. Finding a landlord to take that housing voucher and rent to you is the other half of the huge battle, right? Especially right now as rents are being jacked up in our state in the last year or so, after landlords were burned by the pandemic, right? We all suffered. It wasn't anybody's fault, but landlords took it upon themselves to start raising rents enormously in some areas of the state. And so it's much, much harder to find a rental right now. But anyway, we help people to find access to those places that will rent to them or that are affordable to them. We also have the eviction prevention program that I talked about, where under a law that we helped pass last August, if you had any rental arrears between March of 2020, when the pandemic began, and last December, if your income was at 80% of your county's area median income or below, that you could never be evicted for any of that time period. That's what the state law says now. But most people don't know that. But we help people file what's called a self-certification form, just a one-page simple online form. But that permanently protects them from eviction for any of that rent period, right? And then also they can apply for any rental assistance that's still coming to the state. We know that about $1.2 billion in total rental assistance that we've gotten throughout the pandemic has mostly been allocated, but the state is now getting other funds like reallocation funds from the federal government of about $87 million, that when other states didn't use all of their money, the federal government took it back late last year and is now reallocating it to places like New Jersey, because we have been leading the nation in expending our rental assistance funds in New Jersey. So then, we're doing that. We have financial coaching, like I said. It could be student debt, other things that folks need help with. We can help connect them to things that could reduce their debt beyond what they think they owe. Healthcare enrollment, again, during the Affordable Care Act, especially the open enrollment period. We also offer free consumer webinars. Again, the tax preparation, you can contact Naomi, who heads our VITA Center, or the phone numbers there as well. We also, again, work through HUD, and we are an official housing discrimination agency. So if somebody thinks that they've been denied housing because of their race or any other protected status, and we have some of the strongest protections in the state with our law against discrimination in New Jersey, they can report that to us, or at least call us and figure out, like, is there actual discrimination here before filing. We also have an oil group, and then we have a resource list for COVID resources. Certainly as the cases are starting to go up. So I'll stop there. I know we have a few more minutes if there are any other thoughts or questions.
Yeah, thanks
You know,
for
that was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. So, but as I said earlier, so I'll be uploading the PDF of this that has all the information and the links. So I'll get the PDF from PowerPoint from Renee.
Yes.
You can also save the chat. I've been pointing this out to people today. If you go down to the three dots on the chat, you can save the chat file, so you can get the links there as well. You know, and I think New Jersey Citizens in Action is there on all of these different topics, right? So like, as we were saying, where do you go for information? It's a good place to start, right? To kind of get this information about what might be relevant for your students. So other questions or thoughts that folks might have?
A lot of,
I dropped
it. Very informative, a lot of information. Did anybody want to kind of go back and revisit something or ask a question?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I think that all of these things are related, right? And so,
Right.
like, I'm particularly interested in stopping evictions, right? Because
Right.
evictions, then so many things cascade after an eviction, right? In terms of health and finances and education, right? So I think any work that we can do to prevent evictions is really crucial.
Absolutely. I say that all the time, that everyone's basic needs are so interconnected. We don't necessarily think about them when we're talking about policy or trying to solve the issues in a more comprehensive way and connecting them. But we need to do more of that. But you know, you can't just give somebody rental assistance if their low-wage job doesn't pay them enough long-term to actually maintain it, right? You can't just give somebody food assistance if they're worried about paying their rent or mortgage next week or next month, right? Like, we have to think about all of these needs, about their health care, you know, about transportation, about childcare, all these basic things, you know, in a more comprehensive way. But to your point, Eric, if you can get somebody help with rental assistance, that frees up their money for the other areas where they have to cover basic needs, right? Or get them utility assistance. All of these things are so helpful, or get the earned income tax credit or the child tax credit, right? It's also connected. So the more assistance and opportunities we can connect folks to, the better off they'll be.
Right. Although, you know, and per your comic at the beginning, right, at some point hoping to fix the tree so people aren't in need in this way, right? So we can do our level best to try to get people the resources they need, but in long term, we want to make sure that the system's not set up so that you do have populations that are consistently in this vulnerable position.
Yeah, yeah. And I see Ryan's comment, it's not just one thing ever, it snowballs, right? You know? So again, yeah, there's one thing that kind of, I have a slide, we kind of with gears too, like what happens when one gear shifts? Like, well, all the other gears start to shift too, right? So if you get behind on the rent, like you're saying with, you know, in danger of eviction, you know, it impacts your ability to maybe buy your needed medications and keep your mental health or your physical health in check, right? It impacts your ability, you know, to put food on the table too, if you're trying to cover your rent, right? So everything's interconnected. Exactly, Ryan. Yeah.
Dana and other folks, if you need a PD certificate from a previous session, don't do it here. Send an email to the NJAL address, right? That's where I'm going to be able to take care of things, not within the chat. Okay. Any other questions for Renee?
I just had a thought, like a comment. There's on a side a semi-side note, there's a lot of, since the pandemic, there's been a great increase in the number of scam calls that are related to services. Like if you're on services of any
Yeah.
kind, sometimes that information somehow is public and people are getting constant scam calls trying to, fraud,
Right.
trying to get public information. And then I sometimes when I'm teaching, I have a lot of questions about like how do we tell the difference, or people being afraid. Sometimes even with some of the other information you were talking about, people are afraid to file their taxes or apply to certain benefits because they can't tell the difference between
Yeah.
what's real or what's a fraud and what's not. And
Right.
so I just was thinking that some of this information, some of the people who can help them answer questions as
Right.
like the middle person would be helpful.
Like an ambassador or
Right.
navigator, right? Yeah, yeah.
Because there's certain times when I can't help them. Like I,
Sure.
if I'm talking to them online, I can't help them tell if someone calling them is a real agency or not.
Yeah, and I think, a good rule of thumb that a lot of the government agencies have been putting out in the last few months with these scams is that, if somebody's asking you for your social security number, or other personal information, or asking for money at any point, that's obvious, right? So no one should ever ask, no government agency should ever ask for that kind of information or ask you for money up front, right?
Right.
So those are, simple things that we can tell people. But then you also just want to make sure you have your trusted sources to direct them to. And so here you have a bunch of things that we do at Citizen Action, including the tax preparation, where you can have your list of resources to direct people to and say, these are trusted sources, right? And so you can go and get help from them so that you can then just refer them and not have to answer all of their questions on your own.
One of the hard,
Sorry, Eric.
no, go ahead, Karen.
No, I was saying just that if you have trusted places to send them, it's a lot easier.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the hard things, to go back to the question about, the older people, my dad has Alzheimer's and he's in
Right.
the dementia stage of Alzheimer's, right? So
Sure.
he gets phone calls all the time from people
Yeah.
trying to scam him, right? And
Right.
so no matter how many times I have the conversation with him, he has Alzheimer's. He's not going to always,
Right.
remember it, right? So,
Sure.
so it's really important that it's not just on an individual basis of responsibility, right? But we have to
Sure.
also create communal responsibility to make this stuff not happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge issue with our elders, an aging population. And I when I started out as social work almost 20 years ago, I worked in geriatrics. So I was very up to date on Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and working with the family members and caregivers and all of that. But I think one of the best places we can go for those kinds of issues and find, like, what are the little tricks or little tips, that can help us as family members in dealing with that, or even, if we have folks that we're working with in our own organizations, go to your area office on aging, which is in every single county in the state, right? They have these kinds of resources and information and can connect you to others, maybe, or organizations that can help you to kind of figure out, how do we deal with that problem, right?
Right.
Are there ways that we can kind of disconnect them from, answering the phone or something? Is there a simple thing that you can recommend that, can help solve some of that at least?
Yeah. Well, I am mindful of everybody's time. So I want to thank Renee, as always, for coming and sharing really crucial information.